Hey everybody, welcome back. Today I want to talk about something that has been near and dear to my heart for as long as I can remember, and that's astronomy. I've always been fascinated by how we can achieve an understanding of the universe around us just based on the light that reaches us. And as astronomy and photography are two of my deepest passions, astrophotography is the perfect marriage of the two. Astrophotography can be difficult to get into depending on what you're trying to image. If you're looking to photograph deep sky objects, things like faint galaxies and star clusters that are not visible with the naked eye, that requires a great deal of additional equipment and know-how. You generally need a tracker, a star tracker, that can keep your camera or telescope focused on the same region of the sky as the Earth rotates and the sky moves in relation to that. And those can be expensive, and it requires hours of exposure time and using a star stacker application to put all those images together. So it can be kind of daunting. So a good entry point into astrophotography is actually taking pictures of the Milky Way. And really, you don't need super expensive equipment or a great deal of know-how to capture the Milky Way. Really, you just need a basic DSLR or mirrorless camera, a kit lens or a fairly wide-angle lens that can capture a good deal of the sky, and a little bit of time. You know, these exposures that we're talking about are only like 30 seconds or so. So if you can find a good dark sky on a clear night, with hopefully in a place that's free of some light pollution, and just spend, an hour or so just capturing the sky, it's really not all that difficult. So a couple years back, I was taking an astronomy class at CU Boulder. And we went on this trip to the CU Mountain Research Center in Netherlands, which is just outside of Boulder. And it was a beautiful September night, 70 degrees, a clear sky, and the yawning expanse of the Milky Way lay before us. So needless to say, I brought my camera and a wide-angle lens, and with the intention of capturing that. Today, I'm going to walk you through capturing and processing a photo of the Milky Way, and in this case, of the Milky Way and Mars. Been thinking a lot about Mars lately since the Perseverance landed, and just one little way to wave hello to that place. You might have noticed the last time you went camping, or you were in a situation where you were under a particularly dark sky on a moonless night. And after about 30 minutes, your eyes adjust and you look up and see the Milky Way and all the blinking stars. And it's a beautiful sight. However, it tends to be kind of monochromatic. Our eyes are not very good at capturing color information in such low light. The camera sensor, however, does not have that limitation. So it's able to capture the subtle nuances, the differences in color from star to star that tell us about their temperature and different characteristics of the stars. Today, I'm going to walk you through the capture and processing of a photo that I captured of the Milky Way and Mars on this trip. And hopefully you learn some things that will help you the next time you want to take a picture of a dark sky and capture the Milky Way from our place within it. All right, this first shot is me just trying to figure out a composition while the sky is getting darker. I take these first few frames at extremely high ISOs so that I can limit my exposure time and just kind of figure out what I'm looking at. Now the sky is getting a little bit darker. You can still see some light pollution even though it is quite a dark sky, but the Milky Way and Mars are making themselves known. And here I decided to use the red light of my headlamp to cast a little light on this observation dome on the left-hand side to add a little foreground interest to the image. And here I figured out my sort of final composition. I will crop it a little bit later, but I liked how the wide-angle lens created these dynamic lines leading up toward Mars and the Milky Way. I ended up using an ISO of 1600 for this one. My aperture was wide open at f2.8. Now, if your lens doesn't open up quite as wide, if it's an f4 lens, you may need to bump up your ISO to get a good exposure. But I went with about 20 seconds for this exposure. There's a common rule called the 500 rule or the 400 rule in astrophotography. That is to take the number 500 or 400, divide it by the focal length you're using. In this case, it was 15 millimeters. And that gives you round about a good exposure time to make sure that you don't get star trails or very evident star trails in your picture. I went with 20 seconds for this one uh, as a conservative estimate because I wanted as little star trailing as possible. Okay, here we have the raw image in Lightroom. As you can see, there's a lot of potential here. You can start to faintly make out the band of the Milky Way here and Mars here on the left-hand side. But there's a lot we can do to this image to help it reach its potential and bring out all of those details that were captured by the camera but have been lost in the raw conversion. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, as I do with just about any image, is I'm going to the lens corrections panel, remove chromatic aberration, and enable profile corrections to help correct vignetting and distortion that are characteristics of this particular lens. Next, I'm going to go to the profile, and rather than Adobe Color, I'm going to use a camera matching profile for my Nikon and the Vivid camera matching profile. And this is a good starting point to give us a little bit of increased contrast and a little bit more saturated colors. Next, I'm going to increase the exposure so we can see what we're doing a little bit. And then a really cool trick I learned from lonelyspec.com. Lonelyspec.com. It's a really amazing astrophotography website. I definitely encourage you all to check it out. And that is to make a white balance adjustment on a picture of the Milky Way or any of these sort of deep sky objects. We increase the vibrance and the saturation to crazy Willy Wonka levels, and then we're going to move this temperature slider to the left or right. So we don't want it to be too blue. We don't want it to be too orange. We kind of want purple actually. And now we're going to dial these both back to normal earthbound levels. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is going to increase the exposure just a hair more. And then I want to isolate the sky because we're going to work on that a little bit. To do that, I'm going to use the graduated filter. I'm going to make a selection of the sky. We can undo that exposure adjustment there. Now, I don't want the trees or the dome of the observation dome here to be selected. So I'm going to use a range mask, select a luminance range mask. Then we're going to show that mask. And I'm going to ensure that just the brighter tones in this particular selection are affected by the adjustments. So I'm going to bring in the left end of this range slider so that the trees, which are the darkest parts of this selection, are not included. I'm going to lower the smoothness so that it's a little bit more of a drastic transition between what is selected and what isn't. And as you can see, it helps define the edge of those trees. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is go to the brush aspect of this mask. I'm going to click on erase, and I'm just going to erase the part of that mask that's covering the dome so that that's not affected. All right, now we're going to unselect show luminance mask. Now we know what we're adjusting, which is essentially just the sky. Going to bump up the exposure just a little bit. I'm going to bump up the highlights and the whites. So just the brighter regions of the image are going to get a little bit of a boost. And I'm also going to increase the contrast a little bit. And already that brings back a lot more saturation in the sky. All right. Next thing I'm going to do is actually pump up the saturation a fair bit until we could start to see the sort of orange tones and the gas and dust in the Milky Way, and the sort of different colors of the stars, which we'll take a closer look at those in a little bit there. All right, close that. That's a good start there. Next, I'm going to use another graduated filter to adjust the foreground a little bit. There's a fair amount of detail here in the lower region of the foreground that's in the shadows that I think just distracts from the image. I'd rather just those fall away to black. So I'm using this graduated filter. I'm going to select a luminance range mask, show that mask, and then I'm going to bring in the left end of the range mask so that, whoops, the right end of the range mask so that just the trees and the darkest regions of the image are selected. I'm going to lower the smoothness of that selection just a little bit. And we're going to just mess with this dividing line until we really just get the trees and the shaded region selected. Great. A little bit more smoothness. Looks great to me. Uncheck Show Luminance Mask. We're going to bring down the black slider a little bit and the shadow slider a little bit. So that all falls away into darkness. Awesome. Now, I'm just going to crop in on this image a little bit because there's some junk over here, that's kind of distracting me. So I'm just going to crop in a little bit. As you can see, with a long shutter speed, these trees moved a little bit, but that's okay. I don't mind. Great. This is a pretty good start. Next, I want to focus on the Milky Way itself. So I'm going to use a radial filter, and I'm going to create an ellipse with it. And we're going to move that ellipse over just the band of the Milky Way. Can kind of widen that a little bit. And I'm going to invert this mask so that rather than affect everything outside of the selection, it's going to affect only what's inside of the selection. I'm going to reset that exposure adjustment that was there by default. And next, I want to make sure I'm not selecting any of the trees here. So I'm going to use another luminance range mask, show that mask, and we're going to bring in the darkest parts of the left in a little bit so that we're not selecting the trees. And then bring down the smoothness a little bit. Great. Uncheck Show Luminance Mask. I'm going to bring up the highlights and the whites a little more. Bring up the clarity a little bit to help show the definition in the Milky Way. Awesome. You can really start to see the structure become more evident. Great. Last couple things I'm going to do are add a vignette to the entirety of the image, just to draw the viewer's eyes a little bit toward the Milky Way, as if it's not vibrant enough. And next I'm going to do one more sort of vignette, but a trick with a radial filter to create a vignette in an area of the image that's not in the center. I'm going to create a giant radial filter and move this where I want the viewer's eyes to be drawn, and just darken those edges a little bit there. Awesome. Last couple of corrections. I'm going to bump up the whites just a little bit more in the overall image. And then that red is peaking a little bit. It's a little bit too saturated. So I'm going to go to the hue, saturation, and luminance panel here, saturation, and then bring down the reds just a little bit. Awesome. And if you zoom in a little bit, we can see the little amber jewel that is Mars. And you can wave to Perseverance from here. You can also see the different colors of the stars that tell you a lot about their temperature. And that's something you don't really see with your naked eyes, especially at night. All right. Let's take a look at a before and after. This is the image we started with, the raw right out of camera. And then after making some adjustments to help draw out just the splendor that's in scenes like these, the color and the detail that's just hiding there waiting to be found. thank you for coming along with me on that. Astronomy and astrophotography are topics that I absolutely love to talk about, and hopefully this has inspired you to go out on a dark night and take pictures of the sky, and be inspired and enlivened by it. We're in some pretty difficult times right now, but sometimes it helps to gain a little perspective and realize like the scale of the universe and our place within it, and how important that connection is. So at least that helps me. If you like this video, please remember to like, subscribe, follow me on Instagram at Matthew Arrington Photo, or check out my website at matthewarrington.com. I really hope you enjoyed this and got something out of it, and I'll see you next week.